Welcome to CityWise. I'm your host, Tiana Stevens. CityWise is produced by the City of Rochester to shine a spotlight on city living at its best. Well, you can always check out a good story at the library, but this summer and fall, the stories are walking into the library. Thanks to a grant from StoryCorps, libraries around the city are documenting the personal history of Rochester's residents through the New American Journeys project. And joining us to tell us more is Sarah Leiden, Community Services Librarian at the Rochester Public Library, and Ivana DeSalvo, New American Librarian. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
How did this project get started?
Well, as you said, we received a grant from StoryCorps. We were one of 10 libraries across the country that were awarded this grant, StoryCorps at Your Library. And we decided to focus specifically on new Americans that have moved here from outside the United States.
Okay, so that was a topic of your choosing.
Yep.
What made you choose that topic for Rochester?
We have a large refugee immigrant population within Rochester, and we wanted to make their stories available for people to hear and for them to share with new refugees as they arrive.
And this project's about a month in, but prior to that, the two of you traveled all the way to Brooklyn to get some training on how to collect these stories. It's quite involved. What did you learn there?
It was a very good experience, I think, for both of us. One of the advantages is they brought all 10 libraries there.
Okay.
So 2 people from each library that was awarded the grant. We were all there at the same time, and we've stayed in touch. Each library has been able to focus on a different topic for their project, and while we were there, we were able to speak about everyone's different communities, why they chose to do that, and okay, this is the problem that we're having, how are you handling this, what solutions have you found? And as I said, we've been able to stay in touch through this as well, which has been incredibly helpful in terms of getting the project up off the ground.
Share resources. I think one thing we forgot to mention was there were 340 applications for the grant, and so we were one of 10. So we, really celebrated that. But it was really good to be able to meet and train with the other winners of the grant, to meet them face to face, and we sharing stories with them now, but also like resources, different publicity flyers that they might produce or whatever. We're able to see those as well and take ideas from them and share our ideas with them as well.
Right. And you mentioned equipment was part of the grant. What sort of equipment are you using for this?
So we have a little digital recorder that is it's the most important part. It's what records all the interviews. And 2 microphones, headphones, little SD discs that actually save it. So it's an entire kit that fits in a little suitcase. It's mobile, and it actually gets to stay with the library after the grant period is over. We get to keep it and continue to use it even after that collection period is over, which is very nice.
And this is happening throughout several libraries through the fall. You started with Maplewood, which is your home base, Ivana.
It is.
How has that been going so far, and how does it work? Someone comes in, or do they make an appointment?
We set aside like time slots for recording, and we asked people to sign up for the time slots so that we'd be certain to have facilitators there to record their stories. We used a number of the students who come to the English classes there, but we also had quite a few people come in from from the community to record their stories.
The setup is a little bit different than what a lot of people might think of when they hear, an interview or an oral history interview. This is the StoryCorps model that we're following for this project, and it really is more of a conversation. So if I was coming in to tell my story, instead of Ivana interviewing me, I would bring maybe a loved one, a friend, a family member, and we would simply have a conversation and just record that informal, very comfortable conversation about my experiences or the storyteller's experiences.
At Maplewood, there were a few students who asked either a teacher or someone from a volunteer, from the classes to be their interviewer. So I had the opportunity to be the interviewer for a couple of my students, which was interesting, and I learned more about them than I already knew through having done that.
So the idea is to really make them feel comfortable and it just talk. So is there a set guidelines for questions, or just kind of flows organically?
We found that one of the best leading questions, because one of the most awkward points is everyone's, okay, how do I start this, is so where are you from? And usually it goes from there, and people just relax and talk about their experiences, and we just sort of let the conversation go naturally where it does. We don't really want to limit what they talk about or push them to talk about something if they're not comfortable with it.
StoryCorps provided us with a list of good questions that if people want to see those, want to review those to get ideas from, we have that available for them, but we don't really recommend that they read from the script, like go through the questions in order, but let it go where it will.
Sure. So for the facilitators, was there training involved for them, and are they just community members that volunteer?
They're all over, community members, some staff members from other libraries within the system, and they did have a formal training that Ivana and I both led them through on how to use the equipment and all the steps that are involved with it.
Do you limit the length of the interviews or just let it go?
We try and limit it to about 40 minutes. Sometimes it goes over a little bit. Sometimes it's not always the full 40 minutes. But we have hour-long slots that we make the appointments for. So if there is a very good conversation that's going on or a really important topic that's come up, we'll usually tell people, please, please, please feel free to come back and make another appointment. But we might have someone waiting outside. So unfortunately, we do try and keep them to about 40 minutes.
What are some of the stories that you can share, Ivana, and your experiences in the interviews?
Well, one of the gentlemen that I interviewed was interesting because we ended up talking about cowboy movies. So strange things, come up. But he also told me in that interview that he had accidentally shot himself climbing a tree. So I hadn't heard that story from him before. There was one of the gentlemen from Vietnam I actually did not sit in on that interview, but I know of his story. He was in a re-education camp for 3 years in Vietnam, so that was a sort of a wrenching story for him. There was a young woman who told about when she had her first child here in Rochester, the experiences she had with the communication issues, things like that. And she talked a lot about homesickness and how her husband helped her through homesickness by taking her to the zoo. So it's all over the place, all kinds of different stories.
And so if someone needs a translator, do you accommodate that? How do you work that in?
Well, if someone does request a translator, there are resources, community organizations that we can work with. One of the challenges we found is that the number of languages that people speak is just long. It's very long. It's a very long list of languages that people speak. If they do request one, we can certainly try and find a way to get one there and help them with it. But that being said, we're not restricting the interviews to just being in English. If someone comes in and they would just rather speak in a different language, absolutely, please go ahead.
And would that facilitator need to also be not necessarily?
No, not necessarily. If they want someone to interview them instead of maybe just telling their story on their own, it would be helpful to have someone who spoke the same language. But,
So the facilitator is there to kind of help move the story along, but not a necessary part of it.
The facilitator's role is really to watch the equipment.
It's semantics, really, terminology, but facilitators are the people who operate the equipment and maybe take notes during the interview for tagging the recording later, with keywords. But the interview takes place between the storyteller and the interviewer. That's the terminology that we use. So the interviewer, if it was going to be in a different language, would most likely speak the same language. But I had one student that I interviewed. She slips in and out of Polish. She's an older woman, and she attempts to use English, but she will slip into Polish without even knowing that she's done that sometimes. But
What have you learned so far, Sarah, throughout the process that maybe you didn't know before?
I think one of the sort of themes that we have heard throughout nonstop is how optimistic everyone is and how thankful everyone we've spoken to is to be here and to be in Rochester, and just looking forward to the future and how hopeful they are. Some of the stories that people tell us, that I sit there and I'm saying, I don't know if I could do what they did and still be as optimistic and hopeful for the future and as positive as they are. And that's been an amazing experience for me personally, at least.
I think something I probably should have anticipated but didn't was the fact that I've approached different people to tell their stories, and they've told me that it's too painful. They don't want to do the recording because the story is too painful. In that case, we just say, well, you're in control of what you want to talk about, so you can set up the boundaries beforehand, to tell your story. But I guess the first time I heard that, I was like, yeah,
makes sense.
It makes sense, but I didn't anticipate hearing that.
Right. What happens to the stories after they've been recorded?
If a storyteller chooses to release it, chooses to allow that story to be shared, it can be archived with StoryCorps as well as the Library of Congress and the library. However, if they get to the end of an interview and a storyteller says, you know what, I changed my mind, I don't want to share this, they can choose to have it completely erased. However, everyone who comes in to record actually gets a physical CD copy of their interview. So even if they say, never mind, I don't want to release this to anyone, they will still get a copy of it they can share with their family members, children, grandchildren.
And make copies of it if they want to.
If they want to,
Okay. Finally, what's the reaction been to people that have come to share their stories after they're done? What do they say?
I think overwhelmingly it's been positive.
Been
overwhelmingly positive,
Okay, well, thank you so much. For more information on StoryCorps at your library, visit libraryweb.org or call 428-8797. CityWise will be right back.